Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive? Today, we're tackling one of America's oldest mysteries, the lost colony of Roanoke.
Ooh, this is a good one. Lots of theories out there.
Right, it's one of those stories that just grabs you. Over 100 English colonists vanish from Roanoke Island in the late 1500s. Poof, gone.
Leaving behind, of course, the single word Croatoan carved into a post. Very spooky.
Exactly. So, did they truly vanish? Or did something else happen? We have an expert joining us who's actually done some digging, literally, on this very mystery. Archaeologist Mark Horton.
Thanks for having me. It's a fascinating case. It really makes you rethink how we view colonialism. Those early encounters between Europeans and Native Americans, they weren't always so clear-cut.
That's a great point. We tend to picture, conquests, but the Roanoke story, it hints at something much more complex. Let's back up a bit, though. This wasn't just some random English settlement popping up, right?
Not at all. There's a whole backstory here. It goes back even further than Sir Walter Raleigh, actually.
Okay, so before Raleigh, who are we talking about?
His half-brother, Sir Humphrey Gilbert. Gilbert had this, grand vision. He wanted to find a northwest passage to China.
So a shortcut to the riches of the East. Who wouldn't want that?
Exactly. He even got a charter from Queen Elizabeth to set up a colony. Tragically, though, he died at sea before he could make it back from his first trip.
So then Raleigh inherits this dream, but I'd imagine Raleigh had his own motivations too. What was driving him to, plant a flag in this new and rather dangerous land?
Yeah, well, the Northwest Passage, that was still a big draw. But Raleigh also saw the potential for, let's call it, a base for English privateering.
Ah, so not just exploring. A bit more aggressive, maybe.
A bit. Remember, this is the late 1500s. England and Spain, rivals. The high seas were a battleground, basically. Privateering was basically state-sanctioned piracy.
English ships attacking Spanish ships coming back from the Americas, loaded with gold and silver.
Exactly. A base in the New World. That gave English privateers a real edge.
So exploration, empire building, and a dash of stealing Spanish treasure. Sounds like an adventure story. But Raleigh's first attempt to settle Roanoke in 1585, that didn't exactly go as planned, did it?
It was a bit of a mess, to be honest. Sir Richard Grenville led the expedition. Over 600 men, soldiers, scientists, even a German metallurgist, hoping to strike it rich.
Always gotta have someone looking for the gold.
Right. They built a fort on Roanoke Island. But relations with the local Native Americans, not so good. Things soured quickly.
Conflict.
Enough that they ended up needing Sir Francis Drake to come rescue them, bring them back to England.
Okay, so not a total success,
Yeah.
but did everyone come back?
Well, about that.
Yeah.
15 men were left behind at the fort.
Yeah.
Never seen again.
Ooh, foreshadowing. So strike one for the Roanoke colony. But Raleigh, he wasn't giving up, was he?
Not a chance. He was determined. Seems he learned from that first attempt, though. The next expedition, 1587, John White was in charge. Artist turned governor. Interesting guy.
This time, it wasn't a military outpost, right?
Nope. A civilian colony, men, women, and children. The goal was a permanent settlement.
And this is where we really get into the mystery. With John White, tell us about him. What were their goals? What were the early days like for this new colony?
Well, White himself, talented artist, also good at map making, surveying. He'd been on that 1585 trip, so he knew the challenges of Roanoke firsthand. This new colony, much smaller, about 115 people. They land, start building homes, planting crops, trying to, coexist peacefully with the Native American tribes.
Sounds idyllic, at least at first.
Relatively, yeah. But they quickly realized supplies were running low. White had to make a tough decision, go back to England for more.
Leaving behind his daughter, son-in-law, and newborn granddaughter? Talk about a tough call.
I know, right? Must have been agonizing. Figured he'd be back in a year or two, tops.
Ugh.
But as we know, fate had other plans.
You mentioned those rising tensions between England and Spain. How did that global conflict affect White's journey, and what about the colony's fate?
This is where world events really slam into the lives of these colonists. White's getting ready to sail back, and bam, the Spanish Armada set sail for England.
Uh-oh. Bad timing.
The worst. Queen Elizabeth needs every ship, every man to defend the country. White's stuck. Can't get back to his family or the colony.
A short trip turns into how long?
3
Years.
Wow. 3 years in a brand new colony. So much could go wrong.
Right. So what's it like when White finally makes it back to Roanoke in 1590? Well, imagine sailing across the Atlantic, all that anticipation, worry. After 3 years, you arrive, and the place is deserted.
Ghost town.
That's what White found. Eerie silence, houses empty, even his own stuff just scattered about like someone left in a hurry.
No colonists, no signs of a struggle, no explanation, just gone.
Except for two clues, two words carved into wood, CRO, on a tree, and on a fence post, Croatoan.
Now, Croatoan was the name of a nearby island, right?
Yeah.
Home to a Native American tribe. One that, if I remember correctly, the colonists had decent relations with. So was that carving intentional? Like a message? Seems they had a system. If they had to move, they'd carve the name of their destination. If they were in trouble, they'd carve a cross next to the name.
So no cross with Croatoan, that means.
They left willingly. Seemed to suggest that, at least.
Okay, so if they went to Croatoan, a place they were seemingly cool with, why not just sail over and find them? Seems simple enough.
You'd think so. But according to White, his ship's captain, he was more keen on, you guessed it, hunting Spanish treasure ships.
Ah, privateering wins again.
Right. Plus, a storm was brewing, so even though they'd sailed right past Croatoan days earlier, back to England they went.
To be that close must have been incredibly frustrating.
You have no idea. It really shows how, well, random history can be. Tiny little details leading to huge consequences.
White heads back to England, no answers. And as far as we know, nobody ever goes back to look for the lost colony on Croatoan.
Sad but true. England had other priorities, it seems.
An entire colony just vanishes, almost like they were erased. But that question lingers. What happened? Did they disappear? Or did they become something else entirely?
Great question. And one that might be answered by looking at the evidence. We'll explore that and Mark Horton's intriguing discoveries after a quick break. All right, we're back, and we're diving right into the theories about the lost colony. Deserted settlement, a cryptic message, no colonists. So, what are the main explanations for their disappearance?
Well, the most popular one, and it makes sense, is that they assimilated into the Croatoan tribe. Makes sense, right? The message, no sign of distress, and they seem to have good relations with the Croatoans before White left.
Yeah, but wouldn't there be, I don't know, more evidence of English culture surviving if they fully integrated language, traditions, that kind of thing? Great question. And that's something archaeologists like Mark Horton have been trying to figure out. His work on Croatoan Island, it's turned up some pretty interesting stuff. European artifacts, pottery shards, a Nuremberg token, even parts of a musket, all mixed in with Native American remains, dating back to the right time period.
So Europeans living among the Croatoans using their tools and things alongside the Native American stuff. Sounds like a real connection to the lost colony.
It does, yeah.
Yeah.
But here's the thing. A lot of that European stuff, it actually dates from after the colony vanished. So it might be a longer, more complex story of, cultural exchange than we thought.
Like those 115 colonists, they were just the start of a much bigger interaction between the Europeans and Native Americans in that area.
Exactly. It's not as simple as it might seem at first.
Okay, so assimilation's one theory. What else is out there? What other explanations have people come up with?
Some folks think they might have moved to the Chesapeake Bay. That was their original destination, remember? Maybe they built boats or got some and just decided, hey, let's head north.
It's possible.
Or, they could have succumbed to starvation, disease, especially with White being delayed and their supplies running low. Tough times.
Those early settlements, it was brutal trying to survive. New environment, limited resources, always the threat of sickness. Amazing any of them made it.
I know, right? And then there's always the possibility of conflict, another Native American tribe maybe. That first Roanoke Colony, led by Ralph Lane, they had some pretty nasty run-ins with the locals.
So the lost colony could have met a similar end.
It's possible.
So we've got assimilation, relocation, starvation, disease, conflict. Probably wasn't just one thing, huh?
Most likely a combination, yeah. A perfect storm, so to speak. And here's a weird detail. All the searching, the digging, all that. They've never found White's City of Raleigh or Lane's Fort on Roanoke Island.
You'd think there'd be something, some foundation, something to show where the settlements were. It's like the island's keeping secrets.
Adds to the mystery, right? But let's talk more about Mark Horton's work. He's been excavating on Croatoan Island, which is called Hatteras Island now, for years. His findings, they really shake things up, challenge how we think about the lost colony.
This is where it gets really interesting, right? We're going beyond the basic theories and into real evidence. What's Horton found that backs up the assimilation idea?
Well, as I said, he's found European stuff mixed with Native American stuff from the right time period. But the coolest stuff, it suggests a real mix of cultures, things you wouldn't normally find in a Native American settlement. English pottery shards, for example, mixed with traditional Native American ceramics.
So it's not just Europeans living nearby. It's like their stuff's all blended together.
Exactly, and it's not just pottery. That Nuremberg token, that's a metal disc they use in Europe for trade and stuff. Super rare to find that in a Native American setting.
Yeah, that's out of place.
Right, and then the musket parts. Muskets, that was cutting-edge tech back then. Native Americans would wanted them. Bad. Finding musket parts with them, that means more than just simple trading was going on.
Sounds like the colonists and the Croatoans, their relationship was way more, well, fluid and complex than we usually picture. But what about that stuff from after the lost colony vanished? What's that telling us?
That's where it gets even more wild. Horton's found a lot of European stuff in the early 1600s, decades after the colony's gone. So it looks like Europeans and Native Americans in that area kept interacting, even after that first group of colonists disappeared.
It's not just the colonists disappearing into the Croatoan tribe. It's like other Europeans showed up later and joined the party, kept mixing things up.
Yeah, exactly. Makes you rethink the whole lost colony idea, right? Maybe it was more of an ongoing thing, cultures blending over time.
It's a fascinating thought. The lost colony, it's less about a sudden vanishing act and more about, like, a slow merging of identities. But what does that mean for how we understand early America? How does this challenge the usual stories about colonialism? How did Europeans and Native Americans relate to each other? We'll get into that when we come back for our final part of this deep dive. Okay, so we've talked theories, we've looked at the evidence, but what about the bigger picture? What does this all mean? What's the lasting impact of the lost colony? This 400-year-old mystery, how has it shaped how we see history, how we see America itself?
Well, it's definitely become part of American folklore. It's this puzzle that just sticks with you, makes you wonder what we really know about the past.
Yeah, I mean, it's got everything. Adventure, mystery, even a little bit of that, like supernatural vibe. No wonder there are so many books, documentaries about it. Even that outdoor play on Roanoke Island.
Oh yeah, The Lost Colony. Been running since 1937, still going strong. It shows you how powerful this story is. But like we've been saying, the real story might not be about people just vanishing, right? Horton's work, it points to something way more complicated, way more nuanced. It changes how we look at colonial history.
It makes you think maybe surviving for those colonists meant becoming something new, a new identity, a new way of life.
Yeah, exactly. It suggests that when Europeans met Native Americans, it wasn't always about conquering, taking over. Sometimes it was about adapting, working together, even blending their cultures.
That's a really important point, especially because history is often told as this, like, simple story of winners and losers.
Right. The Lost Colony, it reminds us that history is messy. It's not simple. It's full of surprises. And it makes us think about the people who don't always get talked about. Like in this case, the Native Americans who were interacting with those early settlers.
Their story matters just as much.
Absolutely. And if they're right about the Croatoans, it means we have to recognize how much cultural mixing played a role in how American society started. It's not just some side note. It was a big part of it.
So we started with the Northwest Passage, Sir Walter Raleigh's big ambitions, and we ended up in the middle of this mystery that just won't quit. We've learned about how hard it was for those early English settlements, the complicated relationships between the colonists and Native Americans, and all the clues they left behind.
But I think even more than that, we've seen that history isn't just dates and battles. It's about the choices people made, the connections they formed, and these mysteries that still fascinate us all these centuries later.
It's about asking questions, looking at things from different sides, and accepting that we might not have all the answers. Sometimes the best stories are the ones that don't have a neat little ending, right?
Definitely. And that brings us to something for you all to think about. If the Roanoke colonists really did join the Croatoan tribe, what does that tell us about survival, about adapting, about how our identities can change when we face huge challenges? It's a question that goes way beyond the lost colony. It's about what it means to be human.
It's something for all of us to consider as we keep learning about history and the ever-changing story of who we are. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the mystery of the lost colony of Roanoke. We hope you keep digging, keep asking questions, and keep exploring the amazing world of history.